I think many of you know that we lived in Toledo before we moved here to Muskegon. And when we lived in Toledo in the heart of the inner city, we lived down the street from a church where people talked to the dead. Now, honestly, I'm just to be totally honest with you, we thought they were really weird. And to be real frank with you, they were really weird. They did weird things. In their services, they turned all the lights off and had big, long trumpets appear. Shar, you're going to have to up your game here a little bit. Long trumpets appear from which beads would flow upon people who needed to get a message from somebody who is dead. And the folks I know who went to that particular church would tell me that the experience with the dead would be something like this. Ethel, I am doing fine, and you'll do fine too, and someday we'll meet. In the meantime, hang in there. Now, not a bad message, amazingly manipulative, but not bad, and yes, really weird. To me, talking to dead people seems very weird. I'm a modern person, 21st century person. I don't go around talking to dead people. Moderns don't do such things. Or do we? Maybe we moderns miss out on something essential because we do not take as seriously as we should that life in the present involves a dialogue with the dead. Maybe you and I are so propelled forward that we forget the significance of what has come before us. Now, I'm not advocating that you become spiritualists, please, and talk with the dead like these folks said. Please don't do that, all right? That was truly bizarre and manipulative, but as I think about it, is not Christian worship an encounter with the dead sometimes? Regularly we read writings from dead people. People like Paul and Luke and John and David and Martin Luther and St. Francis or Martin Luther King Jr., Elijah, and Moses. Now, I got to be honest with you, I find Transfiguration Day to be really odd, to be quite weird. I have never, every time I go to preach on it, I don't know what I'm going to say. It takes me a long time. The day seems so unmodern, so disconnected to lives that you and I live. Jesus, he goes up on the mountain, taking some friends with him, prays, has his face and his clothes become dazzling white, and then a couple of dead guys appear to him, Elijah and Moses. We moderns don't talk with the dead, right? But here, Jesus is speaking with the dead. Now, you wonder why he's talking to these particular dead guys. Some suggest that they represent the law and the prophets of the Old Testament, maybe. But I suspect that the reason these two dead guys show up has to do with the stories that circulated about them when they died or when they disappeared. Both of them, both Moses and Elijah, were thought to have disappeared from life. The folklore was that they were assumed into heaven without first having to die. And I guess the idea is that it's easier for such folks to return as they do in our story today. Now, all of this is really bizarre, phenomenally pre-modern, but it indicates how significant these two guys were for Israel's corporate memory. Actually, in today's first reading from Exodus, we encounter the very, very special role that Moses had in Israel's corporate remembering. Moses, this reading is trying to tell us, was the intermediary between God and God's people. Only Moses got to encounter the fullness of God's glory. When he comes out of the meeting with God to talk with his people, he has to put a veil on because the people of God cannot stand seeing the glory of God in all of its fullness. But he can, at least in this portion of Exodus, you should know in another portion of Exodus, we're told that he cannot see the glory of God. He can only see the back side, the rear end of God. It's wonderful, wonderful literature. Still, Moses was big in Israel's memory. We cannot tell the story of Jesus without telling the story of Moses and Elijah. We have to confront some dead guys. You cannot tell your own story without telling the story of your parents and grandparents. And Christian congregations cannot tell their story without a reference to those folks who have come before us. We cannot move faithfully into the future without an encounter with the past, without taking some time to talk to the dead. Now, I know, and some of you are going to say this to me, some folks want to stay in that past. I realize that. In the last decade or so of my mom's life, I felt she wanted to stay in the past. She really wanted to stay in the past. And I felt it wasn't serving her, but I was a lot younger, so I don't know what right I had to judge her in that way. As we go forward right now, moving beyond the devastations of the pandemic, we will not be served by shaping our church life or our cultural life simply by what has been done in the past. I'm going to say that up front. These are new days that require new imagination, and I hope this congregation has been living into that new imagination. But at the same time, don't be led down the path of believing that others haven't been through hard times too. Other folks before you have been through hard times too. And sometimes it helps to talk with the dead because of that. And by the way, it's probably worth our while noting what the dead today are talking about. Moses and Elijah are speaking of Jesus' departure. The word literally means exodus. Like his people before him, Jesus is about ready to enter into a journey of liberation, a journey of freedom. And weirdly enough, that journey will take him to Jerusalem, where he's going to die. Transfiguration is preparing us for Lent, for Jesus' crucifixion. The dead guys today are talking about death. Wow. Maybe that's part of the reason we moderns don't want to meet the dead, because we don't want to talk about that subject. You know, we can talk about sex, we can talk about everything these days. Let's just not talk about death. Death makes us uncomfortable. Death is something we'd rather not talk about. And the dead guys force us to deal with the whole truth. These days, in a couple of our classes, we are dealing with the insights of Richard Rohr in his book, The Wisdom Pattern. Rohr identifies what he thinks to be the universal pattern of life, the way life is for everybody, especially a life that is going someplace and someplace good. The pattern is this: order, disorder, reorder. We Christians put it this way: life, death, resurrection. All three, we are saying in the class, by the way, are important. All three are essential, but a lot of times we'd rather not talk about the disorder part, the death part. Yet the dead today are talking about it. Jesus was talking about it. He had just said in our reading for today, or right before our reading for today, the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the chief priests, elders, and scribes, and be killed. And he has just said, if anybody wants to follow me, they're going to have to deny themselves, pick up their cross daily. Jesus didn't avoid talking about death. Actually, what his transfiguration is shining the light on is his movement toward death, his teaching about dying. The neon light is highlighting the one who is going into disorder himself and taking us with him. And this is how it works, folks. If you want real life, renewed life, you first have to die. And I wish I could get a hold of Vladimir Putin and convince him of this. But narcissists of every kind never come to this conclusion. For them, life is always about more stuff, more land, more applause, more notoriety, more power, more them. Ego is everything. And Jesus says the ego is going to need to die. The movement toward transformation and the amazing gifts it brings will not occur without death. And Jesus, by the way, embodies that for us. What we get in Lent is one who gets over himself, one who takes the way of the cross, one who submits to the universal pattern, order, disorder, and reorder, life, death, and resurrection. In the old hymn that we sang at the beginning of this service, we hear Jesus described as the Son of Man, the Son of Humanity, a title the Bible gives him relatively frequently. This title suggests that what we get in Jesus is what we all get. He is called the son of Adam, the dusty one, like we're all sons and daughters of the dusty one. Jesus, in other words, is a stand-in for all of us. What occurs to him occurs to all of us. We too must die. We too must travel with Jesus to Jerusalem. This is how life works, especially life that is full, meaningful, helpful, and ultimately joyous. I will challenge you to find Vladimir Putin ever smiling and laughing. He won't. And this is what happens when the world is about me and my ego. There is no resurrection without death. Now, I must say, though, that Jesus' little trip to the mountaintop is in some ways an attempt on Luke's part to tell you how it all ends. So before you get too lost and depressed about the death part, I want you to hear this. Luke tells us that this transfiguration occurred 8 days later. That's a big number in the Bible. Big number in the Bible. The number 7 is the number of perfection and completeness. That's why it takes 7 days for God to create everything. And guess what? 7, when I learned this in 3rd grade, I think at Lakeside Elementary, 7 plus 1 is 8. That is to say, perfection, perfection. Completeness. This is what happens on the 8th day. And therefore, the number 8 was used by the church to speak of the end, the final future, to speak of resurrection. Sometimes you and I think this is one of these sometimes, you and I need to know where this is all going. Sometimes we need to know that death will not only bring death, but it will bring eventually resurrection. Before we plunge into Lent, we are given a picture of glory. These 40 days of Lent, they're going to be long. They're meant to be long. Dying isn't easy. Getting over your ego is tough work. Risking is quite challenging, quite scary, but trust this. Trust this. In the end, the light shines. In the end, we experience reorder. In the end, life and resurrection reign. In the end, there is glory heaped upon glory. Who would have thought that a little encounter with some dead guys would have brought us to this? But it does, especially when the meeting with the dead includes not only one who died, but also one who was raised to new life. This day is all about him. But you know what? He is us. We will die. But hear this. We will be raised again. Amen.